Hi everyone, and welcome to session 2 of day 4 of the Conservation Careers Fair Zambia. We're happy to have you join us once again. I hope you enjoyed the last session. If you missed it, you can still catch it on our Facebook page, and don't forget to visit cczambia.com where you can find out more information about our speakers and about the fair in general. You can also find out about the different job opportunities that are available in conservation in Zambia right now. I am so excited to introduce our next speaker. Her name is Mpunga Nayangwe, and she's a phenomenal woman who works in a field that we don't often talk about, which is guiding and the tourism industry. I know this week we've talked a bit about tourism and the potential jobs, but you're the first person we have who works directly in the tourism industry. So thank you so much for joining us, Mpunga, and welcome.
Thank you for having me, Louie.
Yes.
It's a great pleasure.
So we'll jump straight into it. Can you tell us a bit about yourself? Who you are, where you grew up? I know your bio says you are a city girl, so can you tell us which city and how you found yourself working in conservation?
Okay, so I was born in Kabwe, lived partially in Lusaka, but I grew up in Ndola. I call Ndola my hometown because that's where I literally, I think, spent my teenage years and a little bit of my young adult years.
Okay.
Then from there, moved to Lusaka, to explore and find new opportunities. I did a small course in office management that landed me a job as a personal assistant. I worked for a German consulting firm. We were, it was in civil engineering. I worked there for so many years, about 5 years. And after that, that's when I decided to give that job all up and pursue a dream in something that I've always wanted to do ever since I was a little girl. Okay. Yeah, so growing up, literally, I did not grow up in a background that's close to wildlife. Like most, I've read so much about other wildlife enthusiasts. They have a great connection with the wild. Unlike me, I was typical city girl. But I remember growing up very interested in birds surrounding our residential areas that I even talked about in my bio, that I got to discover and learn about their names and their cause so many years after. It's very interesting anyway. So after that, after dreaming, and the Chongololo Club of the Air was a part of my afternoon. I think it used to air every Sunday, if I'm not mistaken. I remember listening to it. It was a very interesting part of my life also. And I used to visit the zoo, the Ndola Zoo, quite often. And with my siblings, we used to spend most of our afternoons every Sunday. I remember my parents would give us some money, some pocket money. We'd go there, and I loved watching the pythons, the lions, and the vivid monkeys. Everything was exciting. I always, even though I think I was delayed and did not have a breakthrough to this industry, the wildlife safari industry and the tourism industry as a whole, because I think because of my background. It wasn't something easy, but I used to try anyway. But they say everything has got its own time. So that's how in 2017, that's 3 years ago, I came across a Facebook page that was saying we're training safari guides. I looked at it and said, wow, this is what I've been yearning for. This is what I've been looking for all my life. I inquired, and it was so positive, and I joined. I trained at Bedrock Africa. Bedrock Africa is a school that trains safari guides. Every safari guide we have in Zambia has been through Bedrock. Bedrock trains safari guides from the very beginning to the end. They are responsible for every safari guide. If you've been on safari, every guide who will take you out on whatever activity you're going on is obviously been through the hands of Bedrock Africa. So when I went to Bedrock, I like to call myself, I was a rookie. Someone who literally, I was not affiliated to any safari lodge like everyone else. We were like 20 plus, 4 women and the rest were men. I barely knew a thing, but I told my principal and I told my lecturers, I told them, I'm starting this from scratch. I do not know anything, but I'm very interested. This is what I've been longing for all my life. I remember as a little girl, my dad used to think I was going to be a vet doctor because I loved playing with frogs and insects, but anyway, it's not something I really wanted. So yeah, going back to Bedrock. So when I went there, I was surrounded by so many people who inspired me, looking at how they were so knowledgeable. It was so incredible, and I was filled with so much admiration, and all I wanted was to be like them. They were so knowledgeable in everything: flora, fauna, birds, grass, as tiny, even with things as tiny as lizards, everything. They knew all about them. They would interpret to you what they were doing. So I think that's where I gained my inspiration from them, and from then on, that's how I joined the safari industry.
That is an amazing story. If you're just joining us, thank you so much. Please don't forget to write your questions from Mpunga in the comment section below. We can't wait to hear from you. So you start off in Kabwe, and you end up in Ndola, a little bit in Lusaka. You are a city girl, which I think is very important, because if you're listening at home, there's this idea that people who work in conservation always knew what they wanted to do, and they had, like you said, this deep connection with the bush.
Yeah.
Or with nature, and that's not the case for everybody. But I'm glad that you now, looking back, can mention, oh, but I did love nature, I liked insects, and I was curious. And even though I ended up on a different path, like you mentioned, it's never too late to pursue your dreams.
Yeah.
So now we're at Bedrock Africa, and we're learning from all of these very experienced people. Can you tell us a bit about what the course is like and what some of the lessons you learn are like? Because like you mentioned, when I go on safari, they seem to know everything. There's a bird right now in the background. I don't know if people can hear it, but I have no idea what it is. But it seems like guides can tell you everything, or they can just see marks on the ground and say, oh yeah, that's 2 male lions.
Yeah, they'll even tell
like
you
that.
whether the marks are fresh or old.
Yes, exactly. Or smell things and be like, yeah, that's the cure for some obscure disease. So can you tell us a bit about how that works and the process of learning?
Okay, so I think personally, to be a safari guide starts with passion and interest. It's not something that you do just because you hear, oh, safari guides get huge tips. I think that's the path I want to embark on. No, it starts with interest. You have to be interested. You have to have that passion deep inside you, the enthusiasm to learn, to discover, to explore, to also to learn from other experienced guides. I think that's where it starts from. It's like, I remember in grade 8 we had a topic that talked about various ways of learning. There was, what do you call it, oral tradition? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the same with guiding. It's like the most experienced guide leaves the knowledge to this youngster, and the youngster also becomes a fully fledged guide. Then they know everything about the wild. Then they'll also, one day when they're old and they feel they've learned it all, they'll start transferring that knowledge to the other youngsters. I think it goes on just like that. I've learned a lot from them anyway. Mm-hmm. And I really love going on game drives, because from there on, I come back to camp with a lot of knowledge. I go, oh, so that's what he talked about. And my brain has adapted so incredibly that everything just sinks in, you know. I hardly forget a thing.
Yeah, and I'm sure that also comes from just living in the bush.
Yes.
So you've worked in Kafue National Park, and now you worked in Lower Zambezi, and now you work in Lower Zambezi, sorry. Can you tell us about the two parks, the differences, and what both experiences were like?
Okay, so after I did my wildlife safari transfer guiding course with Bedrock, mm-hmm. that's a foundation course for every guide. Mm-hmm. You have to do the transfer guide, then you have to do the practical, then the canoeing and the boating. I'm not really sure with the rest, but there's quite a lot you need to do to be a fully fledged guide. So I was required to do a 3-month internship. So my principal got me a place at Mukambi Safaris. I went there for the very first time in a national park at a safari lodge.
Shout out to Mukambi.
This is the most interesting part of everything. Being in a national park for the very first time, it's not, I knew deep down my heart it was not something, it was not going to be fancy. It's going to be different from where I grew up from. And I wasn't scared, but I was very curious. Yeah, I was very curious. I went there and I told them to say, I'm here because I want to know exactly what goes on. And they did just that. I really appreciate that moment. It was a great experience. It's a part of who I am today. Kafue National Park is a very beautiful national park. As you know, the largest national park we have in Zambia. I call it home because that's where it all began from. I work in one of the most prestigious national parks right now, Lower Zam, but Kafue National Park is home. Yeah.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, now you work in Lower Zam, you work in Anabezi, and you don't really work as a guide anymore. You work more in front of house and management. Can you tell us about a bit about that work? It's still part of the greater conservation ecosystem.
Yeah, so it all goes back to when I trained as a safari guide, I went to Mukambi. I thought the only thing I was going to do was, okay, they told me now that you're not a very experienced guide, you're just going to go with experienced guides on their activities and be a spotter. I did that. It was very exciting. But you have to learn everything, starting from stores management, front of house, reservations, bar service, hosting, everything, even stuff from the kitchen. Isn't it just amazing? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was a whole, so, you know, it's a total package. I think you have to have even a versatile attitude, you know, to get to be placed anywhere. Yeah. So you can do anything. You can be a front of house manager. You can be food and beverages manager, but you can also be a guide. You can also be a camp manager. You can be a guide. That's how it works. Yeah. But I would love to, since I've only done the foundation course, thinking of pursuing my course furthermore, which will happen probably early next year, because everything has been marred by COVID. You know, it has really destroyed a lot of things. So I hopefully early next year, I hope to do the transfer practical, since I got my driver's license, and see and pick it up from there. But in the next 5 years, I think I'd love to be a fully fledged guide.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And so I want to pivot a bit and talk about being a woman in this space. Yeah. Like you mentioned, when you were training, you were one of only 4 women.
There were only 4 women,
yes.
Yeah.
And even every time I've gone on safari, every single guide I've ever had is a man. I have heard of women guides, but unfortunately I've never gotten to experience it. I hope to. But just generally in the tourism industry, you find a lot of women, like you said, working at reception or front of house, or, you know, cleaning the rooms. But overall, especially as you go up into management, there are fewer and fewer women. What would you say are some of the challenges that make it hard for women to get into this space?
Firstly, it's the job setup. It's in the bush, you know. Somehow it's not with the employees, it's somehow with the women. They're not bold enough and courageous enough to stay and work in the bush longer. And sometimes it all comes to the let's say the camp you're working for. Are they really interested in having a female guide around? Maybe they'll, you know, or they'll look down on you and say, can she really make it? Can she really drive through those rough terrains? Is she capable of fixing a tire once she has a tire breakdown with guests in her 4x4? You know, there are some certain things that women look down upon, like they cannot do it because a man does it better, but that's not the case. We need more and more lodges to empower and look for women who have a great passion and interest and who are really enthusiastic to follow suit. Yes. I've experienced these things, you know. They'll look at your CV, oh, you did a safari transfer guiding course, but I think you'd make a better reservationist. Don't you think you'd do great at hosting? I like the way you talk about this country. I think guests would love you in the front. Yes, but give me a chance also. I would love to be a guide. I would love to drive those guests that I was hosting out on a drive and interpret nature to them. Yeah. And I'm sure more women would be interested. And I don't say no woman can do that. We can do it. Definitely.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that you pointed out that it can be difficult to think about living in the bush, especially if you want to pursue a family.
Yes.
Or if you already have a family. How can we create, you mentioned safaris or companies creating a more conducive environment. What could you say are some of the things that they could do to encourage more women or create an environment that's more conducive for women in their lodges?
Expose more women who are working, especially black women who are working in the tourism industry, so that other young adults can see and get exposed and get involved to say, oh, so even a woman who, there are a lot of women who have families who are working in the tourism industry and are living in the bush. Some even get pregnant. give birth. There are some certain company protocols. I think it just depends on what kind of company you are working for. Once you're pregnant, I'm sure you go back home, give birth, nurse your child, then you still have your job secured. It's not that it's the end of the road for you. No, I think even the International Labour Organization would totally disagree with that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So there's nothing really hard. You can still pursue a family. You can still have a boyfriend living in town. You can still have you can still have a husband, and it's a job. Everyone has a chance in life to do something they love, and that should not be robbed of them. They should pursue it. Yeah, just because you're a woman, just because it's a certain time you have to get married, you have to have kids, it shouldn't stop you from doing something that ultimately you love the most.
I love that you've mentioned that no one should be robbed of anything because of their gender, and also that it's okay to want to have children, it's okay to want to have a husband. That should not rob you of a dream that you have as well. You can do both. You just have to figure out what works for you, and find an organization that's supportive of that. So now you mentioned exposure, especially for young people, but I'd like to make it broader than just women. How do we get more young Zambians involved in this work? Because you're the only one that I know who works in this sector, but I'm sure there are many people who are watching out there who are listening to you and they have questions. How do you think we get more young Zambians interested, especially young Zambians from cities like Kabwe and Dola, or even Lusaka?
Some little girl in Kansenshi, like for example, where I grew up from. Yes. First of all, I'd like to tell every young adult out there that they're really lucky to have such a careers fair happening in their era. It wasn't like this the time I was a young adult. It was very, very, very hard for me to. I knew wildlife conservation existed, but even safari guiding, I knew it existed, but I did not know where to start from. Looking at where I came from, I wasn't somewhere who had grown up in a GMA. It's not easy for me. It's people who grow up. Mostly people grow up in GMAs, close to towns, close to national parks, have an easier access to pursuing such dreams. But there's a girl out there in Kablonga, in Woodlands, she's in Kansenshi, she wants to do such type of a job. But how, your question, how do we get her involved? Take part in such, I think that's the easiest answer I have, in such affairs like this one. Get to listen to them. I know there are a lot of things involved in wildlife and conservation, in tourism and safari, but there's something that someone out there really wants, and maybe they do not know how to say it. They do not know how to write it down. They should contact people like you, Mina, me, and anyone else who's been on this platform before. Say, I want to do this and this. At least we know 2 or 3 organizations that might help such young people. Yeah,
I think that's very important. So once again, if you have questions, you want to reach out, please use the comment section, the inbox. We are here to help. And now at least you know 2 people who work in the conservation sector who you can reach out to. And speaking of conservation, we've talked a lot about tourism, and we're assuming that the audience knows the link between tourism and conservation. Could you maybe explain the value of conserving wildlife to someone like you? Why should I, a city person, care about conserving wildlife? How does that help you, Mpunga, do your job?
Because without a wildlife conservationist, without a vet doctor, I wouldn't have a job. A wildlife conservationist is out there looking at prey predator populations. A vet doctor is curing anthrax with any of the animals in the national parks, looking at how many zebras are in that carrying capacity, solving human-wildlife conflict. There's so much more that, because tourists don't come to Zambia to look at a hostess. They don't come to Zambia to see, oh, no, they're here to look at the wildlife that you've advertised to them. There are people out there in other countries who've never seen a lion before. And they've saved so much money for this one lifetime trip just to come to Africa and experience safari. And imagine if the Lower Zam had no lions. The Lower Zam had no impalas. The Lower Zam had no elephants. I wouldn't have a job. And it's not only me, it's a ripple effect. If I do not have a job, what about that housekeeper? What about the chef? What about the vet doctor? What about you, Louis?
I would not have a job for sure. So please, I need this job. Yeah, I completely agree. I'm glad you put it in such broad terms that conservation is a very broad field, as is tourism. We have veterinary doctors, we have ecologists,
Yes.
we have researchers who are just spending a lot of time figuring out how do we keep these ecosystems safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of safety, living in the bush, I'm sure everybody asks, but aren't you afraid of lions? Aren't you afraid of elephants? How is it a safe place to live? And if so, how do you maintain safety?
When I went to Bedrock, there was a topic we were taught about animal behavior, how animals behave when you get in contact with an animal. Let's say on a day-to-day basis, you come across, maybe you're coming from your tent, going all the way to the main area, and you meet an elephant. It's just there, cutting out some, breaking some branches. It doesn't really care what you're doing. So first you have to look at its body texture, how is its mood, how are its ears, how is its tail. Will I be safe if I just move and just leave it alone? Yes. So those are the things we were taught. We were taught on how to look at how is the animal looking at you? Is it comfortable with you just passing by, or have you agitated it a little bit? Yes.
Yeah.
So and I know I get a lot of questions. Like, I remember the first time I got my internship in Kafue National Park. I stayed there. For the first time in my life, I was sleeping in a canvas tent. And you know, the only thing between you and the African savannah is just canvas. And you get to hear everything that's happening outside, from a lion chasing a bushback, and an elephant breaking branches, a hippo comes feeding at night. And you know, hippos are really noisy feeders. So people ask, how do you manage that? I tell them, I don't have a problem with any of that, maybe because I was born with it. I really do not have a problem with that, yeah. So that's that.
Okay. So basically, get educated. If you're going to go out into the bush, get educated on how to stay safe and how to behave around those animals.
Yes.
Because most of the time, they're just minding their own business.
Yeah.
And you need to stay safe around them.
You are the one who's in their space. Respect them. Yeah,
I agree. And then lastly, as we wrap up, you mentioned Bedrock Zambia. I'm sure everybody's interested to know, where is Bedrock Zambia? How can I access them? What kind of courses do they offer? Could you just give us a short snippet on that?
Bedrock Africa is a wildlife safari guiding training school. It's in Choma. That's where the school is right now, but it intends to move, I think, in the near future, I think, to Lower Zambezi. So if you'd like to get in touch with Bedrock, there's a Facebook page. Just go to Bedrock Africa Safari Training School. Yes, it's there's a picture with what bird is that?
A bird, yes.
It's the Zambian barbet. Yeah, that's their symbol. And then, yeah, you can ask them. There's always someone to give you feedback. Okay. Just inquire anything you'd like, and please state exactly what you'd like to do. And if you don't mind, you can also ask me. I don't have a problem with that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So thank you, Mpunga. We really appreciate you taking the time to take us through your journey. And I love how recent it is and how you can prove that it's never too late to pivot and change into something that you'd want to do. And I'm sure that there are skills you learned in your earlier job that you're now using in this job. So no life experience is wasted. Thank you once again for joining us for the second session of today. We have one more session before we wrap up this year's Conservation Careers Fair. Please tune in, and in the meantime, catch up on previous videos. We'll see you soon. Enjoy your day. Hi there. Welcome to the 2020 virtual